Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's Thursday. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That means that it is time for another one of the Agave sessions, which I've been very fortunate in the past few weeks to have some really incredible friends, mentors, guests, people who I kind of see as people kind of leading, shaping the conversation around agave spirits, whether it's Pedro Jimenez from Mesonte or our good friend Assis from last week, which we were really lucky to have. This week is no exception. A friend of mine for a handful of years now. Been very, very lucky to know this guest even before I was really active in agave spirits and was just very much beginning to get into bartending in general. This week, I'm lucky enough to have my good friend Misty Kalkofen of Del Maguey Mezcal with me this weekend, or this week rather. Misty, how are you doing this afternoon?
I am great. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for jumping on. I know you got a little bit of craziness outside on your street, so thanks for being able to still give us a little bit of your attention. Really, really appreciate it. So yeah, how are things? You're home in Boston, yes?
Yes, I'm in Boston, and I was thinking about it earlier today. I've been here since mid-February, and I cannot remember the last time I was in one place
I was
for
gonna
that
say it's
long, and
gotta be a
especially my
long
home.
stretch. That's fantastic. You finally, I feel like this is the first time I've gotten to talk to you that you've actually gotten to enjoy that apartment that you were talking about moving into like a year and a half ago when we were at what was it, Masane, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks again. Thanks again for jumping on with me this afternoon. I honestly feel like this is probably going to be the most informal of the conversations that I've had so far, just because I've always seen you as such a good friend and just kind of great sounding board for myself in my experiences learning about mezcal and working with Vago. So hopefully people will get to learn some stuff and not just kind of see you and I just kind of shooting the shit, so to speak, as we often do. So
And if that happens, it's okay too.
one of the things that I thought was really interesting when I first approached you about jumping on with me this afternoon is that I don't think you and I really quite understood how to describe how to encapsulate what you've done or what you do for Del Maguey in a title. So on the little flyer note, I just all I could think to put was just Misty Del Maguey because you've had several roles. I think, as I tell people myself, it's hard to pin what I do, and you've been working for Del Maguey for even longer. So could you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do at this point in time with Del Maguey?
Yeah, so, well, in Old Earth, let's talk about Old Earth first. In Old Earth, I was spending about 50% of my time in Oaxaca, and I would lead all of what we call our loyalty trips. So taking bartenders down to Oaxaca with me to have a firsthand experience, meeting our producers and seeing how mezcal is made, having an opportunity to really get all of their questions answered, but also have a cultural experience, really get to experience being there for an extended period of time and being in the villages. We didn't spend a lot of time in Oaxaca City. So, and for me, that's amazing. Like, there's no place I would rather be than with our producers. It's like every time I'm there, I learn something new. So to be able to share that, part is really exciting for me, and I love doing it. And then the other part of the time when I was in the States, I really focused on education. So I would help make sure that our team was prepared to educate properly in their markets, and then try and build programs that were beyond just the basics of production, which is something that every brand goes and talks about and is very important, because despite the fact that we are all big mezcal heads, there's still a lot of people that really don't understand. It's easy for us to think that everybody knows, and that's not true. We're kind of in these bubbles. And the truth is there's still a lot of people that really don't understand what the category is, and they're misinformed. And so education has always driven the success of Del Maguey and of the category. And so it's still so important that we're constantly educating here on the ground. So I really kind of take the torch with that for our organization and run with it. So creating opportunities to get more in depth about sustainability and varietals and things of that nature. And so all around education is like a key component of what I do, whether it's on the ground in Oaxaca with groups and whether they're bartenders or distributor partners and reps, or here in the States, both training my team, training reps, being one-on-one with bartenders. That's really the heart and soul of what I do. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. So you started in Del Maguey when?
7.5 years ago.
And that was, you came directly from drink at the time? Is that?
No, I had left drink. I had opened a bar with my good friend Patrick Sullivan called Brick and Mortar. And I had been there for about a little over a year when I finally kind of got the call. I had harassed Ron for a little over 3 years to hire me. I planted the seed 3 years before he hired me. It was one of those things where I was starting to have problems with my wrists, and it was like I was having to acknowledge that bartending wasn't going to be like my lifetime career, right? And really thinking about what that next step would be for me. And one thing that anybody who knows me well knows, I have zero poker face. So as I was thinking about moving into what the next step was, it's like, well, bar owner, I wasn't really ready to do that yet. I wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to do. Because I'd definitely seen a lot of bars, like you have to be there hands-on consistently to be successful. And I still wanted to travel and do other things. So then it was like brand work. And I was like, what brand am I going to work for? There were a lot of brands that I appreciated and enjoyed, but I knew it needed to be something that I really was passionate about if I was going to stand up and talk about it every week for 40 plus hours and be able to do it with honesty and, really feel integrity in what I was doing. And so I had been to Oaxaca with Ron several years before, and I'd been helping him out. Like I'd go and do events at Portland Cocktail Week and different places around the US and in Europe. And so I just went and sat down with him when he was in New York once. And I was like, here's the deal. I know you're probably not ready to hire somebody, but your brand is growing. And at some point in time, you're going to be. So you should think about me. And so I don't know if it was because we were drinking Toblerone the whole time or what, but he definitely remembered, and he would call and check on me like every 6 months and see how I was doing and be like, I haven't forgotten about our conversation, and so that was 3 years before they hired me. And, when they were finally at the point that they could really, they'd hired Ryan in California, Ryan Fitzgerald at that point in time. And I totally understood why, like California is such an important market, especially for agave spirits. And then they hired me 6 months after that. So I'm just poking him.
To Ron's credit, and every time I speak with Ron, it always seems like he's kind of existing on several different planes at one single time. But his recall is really surprising because every time I bump into him, he always seems to bring up something that we had talked about either the last time or the time before that. So it's definitely something that I remember about him. What was it exactly that really drew you to that particular category? Like obviously Del Maguey, incredible, especially at that point in time being Vago wasn't around yet. Being the one, maybe we were just sending our first shipment or something, but there weren't really very many brands on the scene at the time. But what was it about the agave? I guess first of all, the agave category that really drew you, that really piqued your interest.
Well, I'd always enjoyed tequila, and I'm old, so I was enjoying tequila before there was an agave renaissance of any sort, really, and I remember like the first night that Ron came into Green Street where I was working when we met in 2008, and because Leo DeGroff had sent him to see me. He was like trying to build something in the Boston area, and he just didn't know anybody, and he's like, Leo, who should I go see? And Leo's like, oh, go find Misty. She'll get it. And I'd never had mezcal before. And I just remember it was a confluence of a lot of things, right? So he's pulling these bottles out of his bag. It was a Friday night at like 9 o'clock too. He's like pulling the bottles out of his bag and out of the baskets. And every bottle had a story. every bottle represented a family and a community. And he was telling me that like the ritual ways in which it's consumed in the communities where it's made. And I studied religion. I have my master's in theology
Great.
from Harvard Divinity
That's
School.
great.
And so I had been to chartreuse, and that was very moving and very cool, but it's a different thing. Like they make chartreuse as a medicine so that they can continue, traditionally as a medicine, but they continue to make it because it really makes it possible for them to have their devotions, right? It's like it's a means to the end of being of the ritual for them, whereas mezcal is part of the ritual of every day or ceremony, or it's a very different thing, right? And so as he was pulling out the bottles and we were talking about that, that really intrigued me. And then on top of that, as I started tasting it, I had never tasted anything like that in my life. It's like between like how diverse, how every single bottle was so different, even though they were all made from the same type of agave and similar processes and everything. But also the complexity of the flavor, right? There was nothing that could compare on my back bar at that point in time. And it was just like, and then to be able to be in Oaxaca less than a year later, to have the opportunity to learn more firsthand, meet the producers, really have like a nuts to bolts experience and seeing every single step of the process along the way. Like the last thing that happened before we got on a plane to go to Jalisco for a few days with this great group of like 16 of us. It was an unbelievable group. Like, when I think about it now, it's just like, wow, I don't think that opportunity could ever exist again with those people, but
Was Bobby on that trip?
Bobby wasn't. It was like me, Phil Ward, we had Steve Olson, Andy Seymour, I think Jim Meehan was on that trip. We had Eric Alperin, John Lermaire,
Wow.
just Julio Bermejo.
Oh my God.
Like it was all-star trip, and really, really remarkable. But like the last thing that happened was we were in Minas with the old man who has since passed, with Florencio, and he was doing a roast that day. And Ron told him that I had studied religion, and so he asked me to place the cross on the roast with him to bless the roast. And it was just like one of those things. As soon as we got off the bus, Ron was like, "This is Misty, and she studied religion," and blah 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 blah. And he's like, "Well, then," he just handed me the cross, and then even started putting the piñas on you. So the entire time we were there, I'm like so excited, but having this anxiety attack as well, because in my mind it's something that's so important. It's such an important part of the process.
Yeah.
And so to have that be the last kind of experience I had on that first trip before I got on a plane was so moving. We were on the bus driving to the airport, and I'm like crying as I'm like leaning against the window on the bus. But that experience of just like how handcrafted, how it's so connected to the history. Like every producer that we met was so proud of this legacy that they're continuing. All of these things that I've never experienced in any other spirit category. There's always pride, but the way it's part of these families is so remarkable to me. And to be able to have an opportunity to be a part of that and help to continue that and talk about it was just like, it was something I wanted to be a part of. From the moment I stepped foot in Oaxaca, I was like, this is where I was supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's really any time that you can really, and I think one of the things I definitely don't take for granted is my exposure, my level of exposure to the producers that we get to work with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's kind of for me personally, just my own kind of demeanor, and it's very easy for me to get jaded on things very often. And I always center myself in how lucky I am to have the level of exposure and the level of intimacy, which is not terribly intimate, but what I perceive it as being terribly intimate relationships with these producers, right? I mean, I have not spent very much time with them, but I spent a lot more than a lot of other people get to have, right? And if nothing else, I find myself so lucky to be able to have that type of relationship. Hearing you speak about, being invited to put the cross on the roast, and just some of the other experiences that you've related to me in our conversations. The last trip I was very fortunate enough to take in, I believe, January to Tio Ray's son's wedding, where I was lucky enough to see Aquilino. Those seminal experiences are just so profound and just really leave such a lasting impression. And for me, are more than enough motivation to the idea of getting to continue to have those experiences in the future and maintain those relationships is such a driving force for me to get on a plane, wake up at 3 a.m, to get on a plane to go across the country and have conversations with people for a week, and then take a red eye back before going somewhere else, or things like that, and it's just
spreadsheets.
What's that?
When you're sitting there with the spreadsheets and you're like, do you know what I hate? Spreadsheets, But, if I wasn't doing these spreadsheets, I also would not be able to spend so much time with the families, and be with them, and I'm very appreciative to my boss as well, right? Because he's, as my job started changing and our team started growing, I got Ryan, of course, opened up an amazing bar, ABV, and and so for
that pineapple cherry, man,
it's so good. And for over a year, I did the whole country by myself, and it was just like, and then Lucia was hired, and that was amazing. But I really getting to the point, because it was just me. I was like on the spreadsheets all the time, and it was really sucking the life right out of me. And I remember having the conversation with my boss that was like, if this is the direction you see my job going, I don't know how long I can do this, because I'm just not happy. And I can't spend 40 hours a week being unhappy. I spend too much time working to be unhappy in the job that I'm doing. He's like, okay, let's talk about what you want to do then, And I'm like, I'm happiest when I'm with the families. And he's like, okay, well, hold on. We obviously need to grow a little bit, but we can make that happen. Let's talk about how your job is going to grow and change. And I'm so appreciative of that. I'm so appreciative that my boss, I work in an organization where we can have a conversation like that and grow into a role that's more suited for, I'm not a spreadsheet person. I'm not a manage the distributor kind of person. It's just not, it's not who I am. I love educating people. And I know that's my skill set. I know that I'm good at it because I'm a nerd. And and so I'm just really thankful that I was able to, being so early on as a hire, it's like you get to kind of shape and form what the new roles are as the company grows, and you can pay attention and be like, oh, this is what we need, this is what we need, this is what we need, and find the people with the right skill sets. And I think that's been a really cool thing about being a part of Del Maguey since, not really early for the company because it's 25 years old, but for 7.5 years now, there for kind of the boom of the category. And when we've experienced the most growth, it's been really cool to be a part of that.
You've been with Del Maguey for so long now. I've been with Vago for several years, knock on wood, and been really lucky to be stable in that position. As the category has grown, I've seen so many opportunities for people to get involved, maybe not quite, again, as to use the word again, as intimately with a brand as you and I are fortunate enough to be, but have some type of ambassador role with different brands now, right? And to varying degrees of I guess in varying degrees of kind of depth of experience with the brand, right? Sometimes just because of whatever role or whatever, you go down to Oaxaca once, maybe once a year, maybe once every couple of years to get to go. I've met some people who are in an ambassador role and have yet to be down, and that's totally fine. The question I'm getting at is, with so many of these opportunities coming, kind of popping up as the category has grown, et cetera, what do you think is really important for people who want to take on that kind of role that is maybe a little bit different from other spirit categories that's really important? Like,
Oh,
what
wow.
is special about agave, and what do you think what do you think people need to bring to the table to be successful as a representative of an agave brand?
Well, first of all, passion. I mean, I think that the people that are who really enjoy mezcal um, are used to seeing passion in the people in the category, because of how ingrained in the culture that it is. And so once you have that experience, I think it's very different from going to a gin distillery. You could be at the best gin distillery in the world and have an amazing time, but then you walk away from that distillery and then you go out for a night on the town, this, that, the other thing. It's like an experience in Oaxaca is going to the distillery that's literally right next to the house. And then you sit down at the table and you have this amazing meal. And I think there has to be a recognition of the importance of that integration of the culture. And you need to love the culture as much as you love the mezcal itself, right? It's not something that's separate from the people that produce it or the place where it's produced. It's a very much integrated. And so really having a passion, not just for the product, but for the people, for the history, for the culture,
Yeah.
and being able to exude that, it's like, it's not like any other category at all in the way you teach about it, the way you talk about it, and the way you best experience it, right? It's one of the cool things about my role is that, we have always, Ron's home has been in Oaxaca, when he's in Oaxaca, has been in Teotitlán del Valle since the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and that's still where we bottle. And when we take groups down, we stay in Teotitlán del Valle because that's our home. Like, that's, why would we not stay there? And so it's a very different experience than a lot of the other brands and I'm not saying one is better than the other, but it's something that's important to us, right? That has been our home, and they've welcomed Del Maguey as a company and Ron as a human being for many, many years. And we want people to feel that, and be a part of that. And I think that's really important, that it's authenticity, right?
Mhm.
In a way that you don't necessarily find in a lot of other spirit categories.
Yeah, I mean, not to say that there aren't other categories that have that kind of culture, that broad of cultural context associated with them.
Different way.
Very different way,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's definitely an energy, and it's definitely mezcal has a role in culture that I have yet to find in other spirits. And I know that is not a very profound statement, but the reality of it is still very significant to me as a person. Me having grown up on the borderlands, being a Hispanic person, growing up in kind of between those two worlds, for me, it was really like a very much a cultural rediscovery, especially as growing up as a Hispanic kid who didn't learn Spanish from the family, learned it through school, etc. So slightly removed from it, but just kind of in this weird amorphous space. It really helped. And even though I'm not by any means Oaxacan, right? Like Chihuahua culture, Sonora culture, where my family comes from, very, very different than Southern Mexico, but still gave me the window to then go and explore those things, right? And obviously that's unique to me. That can't apply to everybody, but finding just ways to make these cultural connections, I think, makes people really, really, really special in these roles, right? Like, you can love mezcal, but if you really only love the juice in the bottle, I think there's a certain ceiling for how strong of a connection you can really make with people. And I think it's so important for people to look at the broader context, right? And that's why I encourage people to do the work, which is, you have to go down the rabbit holes of whether it be textiles or language or architecture or indigenous religion, whatever. find the things that are going to drive your passion, but find ways to make deeper connections rather than just looking at the liquid in the bottle and cataloging the collection of different mezcals that you have, right? Because it has such a cultural connection that it's really important for you to appreciate that. And the only way to do that is to learn about it, right?
Yep,
Um,
exactly.
you know, and talking about cultural connection, this is one of the topics that I think I would love to hear your perspective on it, because, I kind of just explained how I approach it, being this kid from the borderlands, kind of this cultural rediscovery. You've been with Del Maguey for so long and have such a great relationship with so many of the producers that Del Maguey works with. Do you ever think about how your own personal role, being somebody who is definitely not of that culture, and kind of how that plays into how you are allowed to, or the role that you have, the responsibilities you have as a representative of that culture, at the same time not being of that culture? It's something that weighs on my head personally, and I always think in context, especially as, again, this category has grown and you see so many people jump into these roles that are now considered representatives of the category or representatives of a brand or a family sometimes, what have you. Do you ever think about that kind of dynamic in the way that you talk to people and the way that you talk about mezcal?
Well, I think you have to if you're being responsible, right? Especially in a larger conversation of appropriation, right? There's a very fine line between being an appreciator and an appropriator of culture, right? And so, I think the longer the time that you spend with the culture and how you interact with that culture and with the people that are a part of that culture, um, that line moves, if you will, as that line between appreciation and appropriation, right? So I think that, Ron is a perfect example of that, because he's in a community, he's not only welcomed, but has started a business in a community that traditionally you would be born into or married into, right? And a lot of that has to do with him being very mindful of community mores and being respectful of them, right? And so coming in as an outsider, recognizing himself as an outsider, but also recognizing that it's extremely important to be respectful to culture and what's happening there. And over time, that gains respect. And then that line of what you can do as an outsider and as part of the community shifts, right? And I think about that a lot. And Ron was a very good teacher for me when I first started, about like when I started going down, like making sure that I really understood where my place was in the community, and how to be respectful in those moments. And so I think about that a lot. I think it's really important, and I think especially when you're talking about so many of the, like, we're working with producers that culturally are indigenous, and the level of this respect of certain situations and how you manage that is extremely important. And so like being mindful, being aware, watching every situation, even if you've never been in it before, to try and figure out where your boundary is. I think that you can be an outsider and still be respected, and if you are aware and knowledgeable and mindful of your role in your situation, right? um does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Yeah. Um, kind of touching on that subject, right? How have you seen? So obviously, Del Maguey has grown over the last few years, right? And now you guys have seen a partnership with a larger company,
Mhm.
right? So, carrying through on that concept of kind of on that theme of roles and the roles that you play in the community, how has Del Maguey navigated that from your perspective? Like, how have you guys maintained the role that you guys have had in Teotihuacan and in the smaller communities that you guys producing in? And
Mhm.
how have you guys maintained because when this first happened, people always ask me, what direction do you think the brand's going to take? And things I told people were like, I'm good friends with Misty, I'm friends with Gabe, I really trust those guys. When I see them looking outwards, then that's when I would consider that to be a red flag, right? But obviously
Mhm.
seeing you and Gabe maybe become even more deeply involved and deeply connected was kind of the contrast for what I think a lot of people thought. So
Mhm.
I'm really curious how you have seen that role for Del Maguey as a company change and expand and maybe get stronger, and some of the challenges you guys face of walking that line of still being a positive contributing force to the communities and not being exploitive.
Yeah. No, and I thank you for saying that, because when as far as like when your point of like once Misty and Gabe start looking outwards, that's a red flag, because it's something that I was saying, it's like no, as soon as the announcement of our partnership was made, it was the longest day of my life, because I was responding to everybody on social media and really being proactive, because it's a partnership that we're proud of, right? That like you don't go into a partnership like that without really thinking hard and examining what options are and making sure that you're making the right choice for your business and the future of your business, and for us, not just the business but the families. Like the families are always first for us, and there's a recognition that at some point in time, what like we need to ensure what's happening for them, and in a category that's getting bigger, where more brands are coming in, you need somebody to help you protect that space, and so Ron and my boss Michael and the board of directors with Steve Olson and everybody, they were so thoughtful about the choice that was made, and it was around finding the right partner who was going to protect and not change what was taking place. And so that was extremely important in the decision that we made, like how do we protect the producers that have been with us for 25 years and have really have put their trust in us. You don't have 25-year relationships if there isn't mutual trust. And so that was extremely important for us. And I think for us that, Steve, Ron, Michael, myself, Gabe, we're still the engine behind what is happening at Del Maguey. Ron is still the one with the say about what's going on, which is really important, right?
Mhm.
It's He is the person that every producer looks to for guidance in every situation, and we're very aware of that. And because Gabe and I are so hands-on involved, there's that trust with us as well, and so our role is even more important. And right now, so that there's the consistency of pre-partnership and post-partnership. I think that's really important to continue this trust. And so I'm spending more time in Oaxaca, or I would like to be, than before the partnership, so for me, it's been a really, really great thing. And it's provided for us a lot of ways. It's from like, we have a better distribution system globally, obviously, with an organization like Pernod Ricard, which is a great thing for us. But we also have a partner that believes in a lot of in a sustainable future and is working towards a sustainable future on their own as a company. So on that side, which has been a huge part of what we've been doing, they're supporting all of those efforts, and I think we've talked about this before. When you talk about waste remediation, there are simple cost-effective ways to manage waste remediation, but sometimes it takes money to figure out what those are, right? And so to have a partner that can help us on that side of things, to make some of these projects happen, that may not have been possible without their help, is huge. And that helps preserve and protect the future. If we're not doing the right thing right now, there's no tomorrow, there's no 20 years from now, so all of those things have been super important.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that I think of you guys a lot of times when people ask that, particularly when we started working with Samson and Surrey. I think of Sombra as well, right? Like some of the brands that are really kind of on the leading edge of being sustainable on not just a front end scale, but on a back end scale, right? Talking
Mhm.
about environmental responsibility with everything that's coming out of your palenque is what Misty and I are talking about. For those of you guys who aren't quite following, your vinasas, the liquids that are coming out of your still, what to do with your agave fibers, wastewater treatment, things like that. Like those kind of projects are can be very daunting, particularly for an independent brand, and some of those things, frankly, are just really difficult to do on your own, whether it be find the resources, or have the capital to invest in these projects, to be stewards of the environment and be good practitioners and take care of the communities that you're producing in. And I think the reality of it is that there might be a way, but we weren't able to find it, and it's very difficult to navigate that without any kind of partnership on that level, without a doubt.
And I think also like there's like the immediate of right now of what's happening in the palenque, but also there's like what can we do for the future, right? So when you start working on programs like that, and maybe you find out that like there's students in Oaxaca who are working on something, have a prototype for something, it's like, well, let's see if we can help that program. It's like there's the immediate, that's the things that directly affect the palenque in this moment right now. How do we manage waste remediation? How do we make sure that no vinasas are ending up in drinking in well water or river water or whatever? But there's also kind of this looking towards the future that I think for us, we've been able to take this breath and consider projects that would not have necessarily been able to be on our radar previously, to really look at like, okay, Gabe, what are the things that you've been reading about? Gabe's our director of sustainability. Like, what are the programs that you've been reading about that have been really interesting to you? But because of all of the other things that have been on the plate, we haven't been able to invest in those in any sort of way. Like let's look at sustainability as something bigger than just the environment. Let's look at cultural and social and like all these other aspects, and that's, for me, that's really cool, because we always talk about like, obviously behind every bottle is a specific family, but that family's in a community. And if we're working with that family, we need to be working with that community as well. There has to be something else that's coming into that community from us if we're being good partners, right?
So on that topic of being good partners, what are some of, beyond just the waste remediation, what are some of the other social programs that Del Maguey has worked on in either currently or in the past? Because I know you guys have been active in Teotihuacan and things like that, or also in the mountains, internet installation, etc. Can you talk about a couple of those?
Yeah, I mean, so there's some things that have been completed, like the internet installation. That was a huge deal in San Luis del Rio, because it was like one phone, zero, some people started getting phones in their homes, zero cell reception. To be able to put in an internet tower allowed for families to have 5-minute conversations, every person that had the internet hookup. And it's like, you can get a lot of business done in 5 minutes if you have 5 minutes. And if you're not done, you call back and you've got 5 minutes more. And so that, if you think about the number of people that are working in the Mezcal space in that particular village, that's pretty amazing to have that be introduced, in addition to education, things of that nature. So internet, definitely in multiple villages that we work with. One of the programs that Gabe has started working on that we were supposed to really get going this summer, but here we are. So it'll be in 2021, hopefully. Is working with some educators and students out of Swarthmore College, who have been making talking dictionaries for villages within the valleys of Oaxaca, Zapotec-speaking villages. So what they're doing is going in and creating an online portal. The words are put in Zapotec English and Spanish, and there's it's more of almost an encyclopedia because there's opportunities for their videos of people who are saying the words if they're particularly challenging, audio of people saying the words. There might be a short video if it's something that has to do with like an herb for medicinal purposes, if somebody's created something on YouTube or they make a short video. So it's more of an encyclopedia. So Zapotec is obviously one of the 16 indigenous languages of Oaxaca, but there's a lot of different dialects. So even though, and some words are used in some communities and not in other communities because they're not important to the context of what the main industry is there. So for example, when they worked in Teotihuacan del Valle, there were a lot of words that were around weaving because that's a primary source of income for a lot of people, but that may not be words that were important to people in villages just down the road in Tlacolula, right?
Right.
And so we have started working with them, and we're starting to fundraise to make a talking dictionary for Chichicapa, which will be really amazing. So it'll be, using students from Swarthmore and hopefully students from Mexico as well. And then we are putting out special releases of limited bottlings to support this. So if anybody out there tried our Boca del Cerro, whether or not they knew it, they were supporting this project. So all of the money that we made off of Boca del Cerro is going to go towards this particular project. And if you go to our website, there's a blog, you can actually see the total amount that we made off of Boca del Cerro and how that money is going to be split out and used for that program, because we think transparency around that is super important when you're doing something like that.
Absolutely.
So that's a program that I'm super excited about. It's like, I remember Graciela Angeles saying in one situation, like, if you lose your language, you lose your culture. And, whether it's because they aren't teaching Zapotec in the schools anymore, and usually it's something that's just being taught within the home, and depending upon the situation, it could be a lot of people moving to the States. And so this program is actually being used in the diaspora as well, which is super, super cool. So you have communities in Los Angeles and throughout the US who are keeping their language alive with their kids through this online portal, to help them learn, which is super, super rad. So that's a project that I'm super excited about. Something that's just getting started that we're hoping to bring in other Mezcal brands. We will need to bring in other Mezcal brands to work on this one with us, is recently through a doctor that Ron met, an oncologist, we became aware of the need for more spaces in Oaxaca City for children who are suffering from cancer and their families for when they come to Oaxaca to get their treatments. And so our hope is Gabe's he's in the very base level of starting this program, but helping to build more housing associated with the hospital so that families that are coming from around other regions of Oaxaca to Oaxaca City for treatment will have a place to stay, because that's not the case right now. So those are a couple of the projects that we're working on. So
that's great. Yeah, I mean, for those who don't know, when you drive around Oaxaca and you go to the hospitals, particularly the public hospitals, it's really a bad situation. Like people sleeping out on the streets, waiting to get in, or waiting on a family member who's in. It really is a really bad issue that I don't think people really quite realize what's happening. Even when they're down there, maybe you just drive by, because a lot, especially the one that's right up against downtown, you don't really realize what's going on. So that's a really, really great program. That's awesome. I didn't realize that you guys were working on that.
Yeah, we're just starting on that. And we do a lot of GoFundMes as well, actually, when we find out about people in need for, we do a lot of things within our own organization and the families that we work with. And then a lot of times people, whether it's extended family or extended family of workers in the palenques, they'll come to us and let us know of needs that maybe we can't. We unfortunately can't say yes to everything, and we would like to, but we can actually help to fundraise. And so, definitely watch our social media whenever we have something that we're raising money for. We definitely put it out there a lot. We will blitz you and we don't feel bad about it. But, we try to do as much as we can.
Um, Shifting gears a little bit, I mean, and we're talking about things that are social themes that people might not realize are really going on or are part of the mezcal or agave spirit space, so to speak.
Mhm.
So, we only have about 15 minutes left. One of the questions I do want to ask you is, the category is growing so quickly. There's
Yeah.
so many people who are representing the category or representing brands. That being said, what are one or two, maybe not misconceptions, but maybe things that you think people who are enthusiastic about the mezcal category sometimes miss, or things that either a misconception or something that's underappreciated in the mezcal category that you kind of wish people paid more attention to?
Wow, that's a good one. Thanks for springing that one on me.
Not
Well,
keep it interesting.
no, I love it. I love it. Let's see. I think that, wow.
To put it in context, what is a message that you try and share that you think needs to get out there more? If that.
I always end, I tend to end my trainings on a soapbox to a certain degree. And part of that soapbox, there's two parts of it. And one I've already said multiple times, which is behind every bottle is a family. Like if the organization is doing it right, the person who's standing in front of you should be able to tell you about the families that are making it and the process behind it. There shouldn't be a disconnect between the person who's talking to you about the product and the people who are making it. It may not be as intimate of an experience as I've had or you've had with the families that we work with. It's like, maybe not everybody's been to a wedding. I mean, too bad for them, but it doesn't mean that they don't know what they're talking about, right? So they may not have that intimate experience, but I do think that education is extremely important. That firsthand knowledge is extremely important. I know within our organization, as soon as somebody gets hired in the US, like I remember Max when he got hired in San Francisco, his first official day working for Del Maguey, he was in Oaxaca. Like he hadn't even stepped outside of his house as a Del Maguey employee because he was already in Oaxaca. Because it's really important for us for them to be able to talk with that firsthand knowledge and passion. And so that, and I think that's extremely important, and I don't think any sort of marketing should cloud you from recognizing how important that is. And a lot of products get marketed in different ways, and I totally get that. And our marketing is different from your marketing, and that's fine. But if there's no element of family involved in that marketing, that's a problem for me, and I think it's really important. I think more than any other spirits category, it can really have a huge impact on the hands of the people that make it, and I think that's super important. And we can forget that. We can forget that when we're used to thinking about other categories,
Um, Lightening it
That
up.
was only one.
What's that?
That was only one. It was a really long one, but it was only one.
That is totally fine. You take your pick, whatever you think. And I love it too, because it's one of the things that you and I have definitely talked about when we've been in our dinners or whatever that you and I are fortunate enough to have, whether it be in passing in a city or in Oaxaca, what have you. But yeah, I mean, I hear you say that a lot, behind every bottle is a family.
Yeah. And I would say the other side of that is that I always say, like, I understand that bars and restaurants are creating a program. And I think, we love to see our bottles on the back bar. But I recognize that we're probably not going to be the only mezcal on the back bar. But what I do want to see is I want to see other mezcals on the back bar that have the same, that are as committed to sustainability, as committed to their families, as committed to their culture and heritage as we have been and continue to be. That's what makes me happy. Like when I see a program where I'm like, oh, really cool. Look, we're next to Vago, like that's, the onus is really on us to educate ourselves and as consumers and as people who run programs. And I think it's super important because our dollar is a vote, as to like what we, it really says something about what's important to you, where you spend your money. And that's whether you're talking about mezcal or anything else out there, but I think it's really important to think about that.
What are some of the, to lighten it up here as we kind of intro out, what are some of the Vino de Mezcals that really stick out in your head out of the ones that you guys have done? I know it's hard to say favorites, so I won't ask you favorites, but maybe ones that you remember pretty specifically that always stand out to you.
Oh man, well, I love our Jabalí from Don Rogelio in Santa Maria Valderas is it's so good. And I like really one of my favorite moments from ever was he won best new product at Tales of the Cocktail when that came out. And I remember we were like I was sitting at the table with Ron and Steve, and Ron turned to me as whoever was presenting the award, and I'm sorry, I forget who it was right now, but Ron turned to me and said, Misty, if we win, you're going to accept the award. And I was like, you couldn't have told me that like even 20 minutes earlier, but being able to stand up and and accept that award on his behalf. And it was cool because I had been communicating with Tales as far as what picture should be up there, because they were like, we need a bottle shot, and I was like, no, you need a picture of Rogelio. Like the bottle is the bottle, but you need a picture of Rogelio because that doesn't happen without Rogelio, so that that was always a special moment for me, and I just loved being able to do that. And I mean, the mezcal is just out of this world. I like the first time I tried it, I was just like and not a vino de mezcal, but what I'm drinking today, what I've been sipping on today is our newest line extension, which is the Las Milpas. And it's really lovely. And it's been my jam as of late. I go on these trends, I'll taste something that I haven't tasted in a while and I'll fall in love with it all over again, and I'll sip on that for a while and then I'll switch to something else and I'll fall in love with that all over again. And so
for anybody who's not familiar though, could you explain the Las Milpas for us?
Yeah, so the Las Milpas is a little pueblo that's above San Dionisio, Cotepec in the mountains. And Ron actually met this producer through his good friend Gaspar, may he rest in peace. Like Ron had been friends with him for years and years and years. And one day he went to visit Gaspar, and there was this gentleman sitting there with his arms crossed and a big hat on and a 5-liter jug of mezcal next to him. And Ron tasted it and he thought it was delicious and asked to buy a liter. And the guy goes, nope, you can buy 5, because he wasn't going to carry it all the way back to Las Milpas again. But it's the first time that we've had these 4 single core villages of Del Maguey that have kind of started everything: Chichicapa, Santo Domingo Alvarado, San Luis del Rio, and Minero. And it's the first time since 1996 that we've brought another mezcal to kind of go into that price point and alongside of them. So it's 100% Espadín. It's absolutely gorgeous. They have this Orno that's granite. They chipped it out of granite on the side of the mountain. And wow. It's and so you get these really beautiful, like, super like stewed cooked fruit notes that are really, really lovely. And there's a little bit of a lactic note. It's really soft and beautiful. And it's been definitely been my jam as of late.
I think I was lucky enough. I think if I'm thinking of I remember the Mezcal. I'm trying to remember where it was, but I think I was lucky enough to cross paths with Evan in Marfa. And I think
Oh yeah.
I have had some with him, if I recall. And it was unbelievable.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. And Don Anastasio and his three sons, they're just like that whole family is so rad and so cool. So it's just a pleasure to be able to like share it with everybody.
So we only have a couple minutes left. I want to go out, giving you the opportunity to talk about any other project or program that you've been working on or trying to get attention on, whether it be your podcast. I think you guys just wrapped up the 3rd season of that, right?
Our first season, actually, we just started it. We started it in pandemic time.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I wrote a book with my good friend Kirsten Amon that came out a few years ago called Drinking Like Ladies, and we've been planning on starting a podcast. And we started recording episodes earlier this year, and we had a few episodes in the can when pandemic times happened, and it became very obvious that the episodes that we'd already recorded, if we had released them, would have sounded pretty tone deaf in a lot of ways. Like a lot of the things that were being said would not have, it just wouldn't have felt right. So we were going to have to re-record those anyway. But Kitty and I were both feeling a lot of anxiety, obviously, like all of us were, and really wanting to help our community and not knowing how to do that. Having not a lot of money, not being able to leave our homes, like all of these things, right? But what we realized is we could have a voice, right? We could get some information and knowledge out for our friends who were suffering at that time, and whether it was from a business perspective or a health perspective or anxiety perspective. So we just started recording podcasts and episodes that were really focused around the pandemic. So going into season 2, it will be all women. We had mostly women this season, but we were really looking for, in the moment, who are the best people that we know who can talk about this information and like throw everything to the wind. Who is it? So like we had Bobby on to talk about being politically active. Like it's very obvious that our industry needs a larger voice, and not just right now, but in the future, and or if we're going to survive. And we had Laura Louise Green come on to talk about anxiety and mental health issues. We had a lifelong school teacher from here in Boston get on to talk about homeschooling and what you should be thinking about and how do you manage that, and should you be freaking out that your kids aren't in school and like all of that kind of stuff. And we ended the season on a super high note with my friend DJ Cherish the Love, who is she has survived head trauma, she has survived breast cancer, she has survived all these things through music for the most part. And so we had an amazing hour-long conversation with her about music and healing that kind of left us on this note to kind of, as we move into season 2, there was this recognition for us that this is not just a space and time. We're going to be affected by this pandemic for many, many years to come and for the rest of our lives, and so we're going to get back to kind of just our original intent, which was celebrating women doing really cool stuff. And if we talk about the pandemic at the same time, great. But so that'll be coming this fall, and it's been really cool to share, and you can find it all over the place. Apple, Spotify.
Awesome.
Check it out.
The website is drinklikeLadies.com.
DrinkinglikeLadies.com. Yep.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, Misty, thank you so much. It's been so great to see your face, hear your voice, hear your laugh. My wife said she misses your laugh and to say hello. So thank you so much. Great to see you. And please take care of yourself. And hopefully we'll get to have dinner at La Olla or somewhere like that sooner.
Espero que sí.
Misty, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody, take care. We'll see you guys next Thursday.